Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime. Damian Nelson here alongside the man they call Meathead for May 20th, 2009. Thank you for joining us wherever you're joining us all over the world, whether it be on Time Warner Cable in southeastern Wisconsin right after SmackDown on Friday night.
Thrown out a shout-out to in a very, very long time. It's awfully hot in here, and it reminds me of being really close to the sun. Really, really close to the sun, like up in Morasca.
Oh, our viewers in Nome and Topeka. We certainly have not reached out to them in quite a while.
Or reached around to them.
And all over the world at PWRshow.com. Meat had a lot to talk about this week on the Pro Wrestling Report. Specifically, WWE has some controversy surrounding next Monday night's Raw. Ric Flair wants to get back into the business. We've got an interview with Christopher Daniels, an exclusive interview with Christopher Daniels.
You sure it's Christopher Daniels?
Or Daniels, or Curryman, or whatever you want to call him. But
call him wait for dinner.
Along with the 2-minute drill, the Newsdesk, and interactive Q&A.
Wow.
This week.
We've been talking about it for a long time. Are we on our way to being
I still don't know why you reference Sarah Palin so much.
On Shotgun Saturday night?
Let's get right into it. WWE, some controversy coming with this week's Raw, this upcoming Monday's Raw, as the venue is no longer available. Raw scheduled to take place this Monday night at the Pepsi Center in Denver, Colorado. The Denver Nuggets have done a good job this year in the National Basketball Association, so they have a playoff game scheduled for that night. Many of you may have seen some of the coverage from ESPN and other organizations and other news organizations about WWE basically saying they're going to show up Monday night with their trucks and expect to get into that building to do a show. Vince McMahon making it personal against the owner of the Denver Nuggets, who
which is a mistake,
had nothing to do with it because the building
nothing
was not the primary person who was involved in that situation. But WWE taking a hardline approach, saying that they booked the building August 15th of last year. They have the building, and it's not their fault that the officials at the Pepsi Center did not have the foresight enough to know that there could be playoff games that week. So why is this news? Because we don't know at this point where Raw is going to be. The rumor is that they were going to move to Colorado Springs, which is, I believe, wasn't that where OJ got acquitted?
I think that was Kobe, actually.
Something happened in Colorado Springs.
Kobe?
Yeah. He did have sexual relations with that woman.
Miss Shenane, or whatever her name was.
Is
that how you laugh at my jokes? You made a smile and that was it.
SmackDown is supposed to be the following night, so it looks like they're just going to double that up and use that venue to tape Raw as well, or go live with Raw Monday night, but logistically very challenging. As of this taping, none of the wrestlers had been notified, or any of the staff had been notified of the venue change.
And that's
WWE
the real problem.
Has indeed tried
That is the real problem.
They have tried to book 100 hotel rooms in Colorado Springs in preparation for this if it were to happen, but they're playing this very smart, Meathead, and how they're playing it smart is they're making a news story out of this. Vince was on ESPN. He was on some local affiliates in Denver. This is a big deal right now, not only in the sports world, but in the NBA and obviously the wrestling world.
And again, we spoke at the beginning of this segment here about how it's not necessarily the owner of the Nuggets' fault. It's partly his fault.
He's not a Nugget!
It's partly his fault. You know what they could do is move the Denver Nuggets up to Butte, Montana.
They have an arena there?
No, but they'd be called
the local high school.
They'd be called the Butt Nuggets.
Actually, it'd be the Butte Nuggets.
Pirates are already on their way. Anyway, it's not necessarily the owner of the Nuggets' fault, but it is still partly his fault because he tells the building, hey, we'll need, because remember the Nuggets are the primary tenant of that building. They are the primary tenant.
Like the Bucks here in Milwaukee.
Primary tenant.
Secondary, Marquette, third, I would say.
The primary tenant is the Bucks, even though the arena was built for hockey here in Milwaukee. The primary tenant is the Butt Nuggets, otherwise known as the Denver Nuggets. Now, it's their fault for not having, as Vince McMahon said, faith in their team to make it all the way through the playoffs at that point.
That's a jab.
Yeah, it's a jab, but it's a legitimate jab. Now, the problem is that Vince has a signed contract. And they're going to show up with the trucks at the building that day. Well, actually, the day before when they do the setup or whatever it is.
It's usually that day, morning of.
But the trucks are going to show up. And if they don't allow WWE, because there was no clause, according to Vince, we're not lawyers. We didn't read the contract. No, you're not.
I'm a lawyer. I'm a doctor.
You're also a butt nugget too. We didn't read.
I'm from Montana.
We didn't read the contract, but according to Vince, there is no stip in there, and
stipulation, provision, clause.
There is nothing in there that says, in case this team makes it farther in the playoffs than originally planned, that you have to find a new venue. Because Vince then wanted to book that city in that night.
Well, and it's a recent development. Obviously, the logistics of World Wrestling Entertainment travel and planning any touring company, by the way, it's not just that day. As Beldar said on the Coneheads, when his car wasn't ready, when they went to pick it up, not only have they affected that night, but all the nights to happen after it, and all the sequence of events that were to occur after it. So
You've got a little information on that.
WWE's got a legitimate gripe here, and I appreciate how much they're taking advantage of the situation and making a big deal out of it. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah. I've been wronged!
Well, you even heard on Raw this past Monday night, which good old JR was back in the saddle for. You even heard on Raw this past Monday night, JR reference how silly or stupid or dumb they felt the owner of the Nuggets were. This is total spin, folks. Again, the Denver Nuggets had little to do with it. There's a building that books events. They book it based off of schedule potentials, and obviously they might run it by the teams. However, this was done by some idiot in the office at the Pepsi Center without having the foresight.
But also, it has to do with the Denver Nuggets, because the Nuggets work with the association.
I'm not a Nugget!
The Nuggets would work with the association, as Mr. Steve Haywood would call them, and says that, we have a possible scheduling conflict on this day or this day. We need to bump up the series one more day or one less day. The Nuggets also failed at that point.
That they did, and...
so, again, it's not 100% the fault of the owner of the Nuggets, but he does lay some blame.
Welcome to the news desk, ladies and gentlemen, in the wrestling news this week. Let's talk about what the top stories are. First of which, WWE has changed the name of its July pay-per-view from Great American Bash to simply The Bash. Obviously, some historical nature there, as the Great American Bash was a very famous NWA and WCW pay-per-view. Speaking of WWE pay-per-views, they're going to host Unforgiven in Montreal, Canada, site of the 1997 Montreal Screwjob in September. That had originally been scheduled to occur elsewhere, Pittsburgh being the specific place. However, now it will be in Montreal. Let's go to the ratings for last week. Raw gets a 3.3 rating, SmackDown with a 1.9, Impact with a 1.2, ECW with a 0.93, and Superstars with its highest rating to date at a 0.95. Kid Rock is not going to be featured on the WrestleMania 25 DVD. As for those of you who remember, he had a pretty extensive performance during that event. However, not part of the DVD. We are speculating that it was due to some non-agreement between the two parties as to how much he should get paid for that event. Time Warner is going to be dropping the HD network from its lineup no later than May 31st. This impacts Ring of Honor, obviously, as Ring of Honor's show on HD Net is aired on Time Warner Cable, one of the top cable providers all across the country each and every week. As we said earlier, Ric Flair did publicly state that he wants to return to the ring, says that he will not do so without the blessing of World Wrestling Entertainment and HBK Shawn Michaels. JBL and Charlie Haas have launched a new business called CustomMuscle.com. They're selling nutrition products on the web. JBL is still expanding his business horizons from just Layfill Energy and now partnered up with Charlie Haas as well. TNA is going to continue their live pay-per-view pre-shows. Another will be online just before Sacrifice on pay-per-view coming up this Sunday night. So you can catch that online and get a little hype before the TNA wrestling event. Let's go now to our next story, Meathead, which is Ric Flair. We saw him return at Judgment Day this past Sunday night, and we'll talk about Judgment Day in the 2-minute drill. We saw him return at Judgment Day this past Sunday night, and then on Raw the following night, where Ric Flair was on, by the way. I mean, he was better than he had been in a very long time. Granted, we haven't seen him regularly in a long time, but he was on.
You know what the difference was?
What was the difference, Meathead?
He had a shirt on.
Okay.
And when he was in the locker room, he had a shirt on, and he was drinking Mountain Dew. He was all jacked. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew.
He has stated publicly, as we reported this past Sunday night,
in Raw
on PWR radio, that he does want to return to the ring and wrestle, but he would only do so with the blessing of World Wrestling Entertainment and specifically Shawn Michaels. And if that blessing is granted, he would return to the ring. Now, WWE might be using him at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. We talked about this again. They could have a non-sanctioned match where it wouldn't really be a wrestling match. As Ric Flair said this past Monday night, he can still fight. He may not be able to wrestle, but he can still fight. And the comment that he used on Raw this past Monday night saying that he's better than 90% of the guys out there.
That's what I wanted to get at.
He had also said that in a recent interview.
In an interview, and now they've placed it into his WWE Raw storyline. I'm better than 90% of the guys on the show. I can still fight. I can still go. And you're right, he was hyped up and ready to go.
He could be also being used on Raw to garner some ratings. HBK out. Obviously, some would say he is one of the main ratings drivers of WWE programming. Ric Flair has been historically a good ratings driver. And back on the program, certainly exciting this past Monday night. We'll talk more about Raw in the 2-minute drill. But, Meathead, Ric Flair's retired. He got probably the most spectacular send-off in professional wrestling history at WrestleMania 24 in Orlando, Florida. He said he is truly retiring. He said he was done. He said this was it. He now feels that itch, that bug, that desire to get back in the ring.
They have a shampoo that you can use with a small little comb to get rid of that.
Is it okay for Flair to return to the ring after that send-off? Because wrestlers have retired before. I think Terry Funk has retired 12 times, and he'd even tell you that. Wrestlers have retired before. Is it okay for Flair to return to the ring, even in a limited capacity? We've seen him work with Ring of Honor. He hasn't wrestled. We've seen him work with some independent shows. He hasn't wrestled. He wants to get back in the ring, Meathead, should he? Be allowed to.
How much time do we have?
We got about 3
This
minutes.
is very expanded thought process that I'm working on here. Ric Flair should be allowed to do whatever makes Ric Flair happy. Okay, that's just a broad stroking of it. Ric Flair, if he wants to come back and work with WWE, should be allowed to do so. Ric Flair, for the relationship that he has with Shawn Michaels, should stay out of the ring. Ric Flair, for his legacy, if he really does truly care, and I don't think Ric Flair does, I think for the sake of Ric Flair, others should step in and not allow Ric Flair to wrestle. Because Ric Flair will be the guy that will die in the ring. We thought he did it in Florida in his Gator Boxers.
That was when he was with that other company, right? Well, I'm just asking. That's a question.
We don't have enough time.
Even if Shawn Michaels says yes, even if World Wrestling Entertainment says yes, what does it do to the retirement? What does it do to the fans that bought in and believed in that special moment? Is it ruined? You can't replicate it.
It has laid a big, shiny, peanut-infested turd right on top of that retirement.
This coffee tastes like.
Austin Powers, 1.
So he comes back. He gets
2.
back in the ring.
Was 2.
He wrestles. It was part 1. He wrestles. He gets
No,
back
it
in
was
the ring.
it was 2 because it was
Right
Fat
after he had
Bastards.
been unfrozen. It was part 1.
No, it was Fat Bastards. Stool sample.
It was part 1. I'm an Austin Powers historian.
Whatever. Let's go. We have a show.
All right, which you had just previously derailed.
Right underneath here, where the comments are, you'll see Meathead right, Damien wrong.
You have successfully derailed me, you prick.
What does it do to Ric Flair?
If he were to come back. If he were to come back and wrestle, whether it be once or many a time.
It doesn't matter if he has any Extreme Rules fight.
But then he's not retired anymore.
That's what I'm saying.
But where do you go? Was somebody else going to retire him? He did make a good point on Raw this past Monday night. I didn't retire, I got retired.
Yeah. But you're right. What else does he have to do? Is he going to wrestle Jericho?
In my opinion, it was time for Ric Flair to retire.
It was handled so brilliantly.
It was a special moment. It was a special time. It should not be crapped upon.
Like an Austin Powers 2 movie.
It was time for Flair physically and in performance level to step out of the ring. He may think he's as good as 90% of the guys there, but quite frankly, Rick, you're not anymore. You can still carry a match, you can still perform, but I'm sorry, your appearance is it is simply not on par with the rest of the talent there. And keep in mind, here's the risk you have. You can be back on the roster. You can wrestle. But what makes you special? Used as a special event every now and again, which is what they've done so far, is good. But using them in a regular role wrestling, even once wrestling in my opinion, absolutely craps on the experience we had a chance to be a part of live. That is Ric Flair's retirement at WrestleMania 24. That was special. It was time. He need not get back in the ring. There's nothing to prove except for Flair to prove to himself that he's still got it. I don't think we as fans will get anything out of it long term. I don't think him professionally long term will get anything out of it either.
It's got to stop. I mean, even the talk of him having an Extreme Rules fight, if he performs in any way physically for the WWE, that means he is unretired.
On that note, we're going to take a timeout. When we come back, we've got the 2-minute drill. We've got some of your emails. We're going to talk about, we've got the news desk. We're also going to go to the interview with Christopher Daniels. All that coming up next right here on the Pro Wrestling Report.
I am not a character in a video game. There's not a button to make me jump higher. No reset switch that heals my wounds. You can't control me. I am the phenomenal AJ Styles. I fight on a different battleground. My courage, my fist, my fierce desire are the only weapons that I have.
TNA Sacrifice, live Sunday, May 24th on pay-per-view.
This month, WWE.com Legacy takes you to the Lone Star State, the land of the fabulous Freebirds and the Von Erichs. Join us as we dive into world-class championship wrestling's library like never before.
Welcome back to the Pro Wrestling Report on Time Warner Cable and at PWRshow.com. It's time now for the 2-minute drill. We've got 3 topics, 2 minutes each, and let's go with the first one, which is Monday Night Raw from this past Monday night. Your thoughts?
I watched almost all of it. That's my thoughts. You want my thoughts?
Highlights, lowlights, good, bad.
Santina with an A, also doing the piggy sounds. And Santina came to the ring with toilet tissue. Who does that anymore? You're a man, at least people say, and I'm a man. The shaving thing, when you bleed a little, you put a toilet tissue here. Santina.
Details. It was a great detail that they focused on.
It was.
That you're like, what is that on his face? And then you realize, how brilliant is Santino Marella? Let's just say it. Let's just lay it out right now. How brilliant is this guy as a performer? And, you know, you can say the writers are doing this, the bookers are doing it. You got to be able to deliver. This man has timing, execution, delivery to be one of the biggest stars right now in
and
WWE.
Charisma. People like him. Even when he was a heel, people liked him.
Mm-hmm.
He had machismo, charisma. I mean, he's pulling you in. You're entertained by what Santino does. Some people think that some of his stuff has gotten old, but then it's changed. It's changed and tweaked a little bit. The Santina thing is getting a little bit old now.
To you.
Oh,
and to JR.
It's getting a little bit old. Well, JR used to have or Santina had a thing for JR. That was her little barbecue boy. But it's still hilarious. I look forward to Santino Marella on Raw.
The Miz as John Cena.
The Fuzz?
Yeah, the Fizz,
Fizz.
Santino called him. Hell, Miz is just is getting almost as good. I mean, the Miz was very entertaining in that segment.
He reminded me of John Cena's WrestleMania 25 entrance.
Jerry Lawler attacked by the Big Show really made no sense. JR filling in, sitting alongside Michael Cole, who called JR again Mr. Barbecue Man, which I think is sort of insulting. But be that as it may, a decent Raw overall meeting. 2 minutes are up. Let's go to TNA Impact from last week. We'll start with the rating it garnered, which was 1.2.
Oh, I thought we talked about it on the radio
this is important. 1.2 up against 7.5 million viewers on ESPN on TNT for their highest rated NBA game ever. So to maintain that rating, actually go up from the prior week is a pretty good.
I don't think the wrestling fans watch basketball.
You're probably correct, but the demo's the same, 18 to 24 males.
Different groups, though. Same demo, but there's different groups. I think a wrestling fan could care less about basketball.
Awesome Kong with the tail of Kip James.
Why?
Well, why not?
Why?
Well, why not? Don West and Mike Tenay, they made my VI3 this week. They were on spot. They were on hit, if you will. This past Thursday night at Impact, they did a very good job doing commentary. Overall, I thought the show was good. It delivered what it needed to deliver.
The show still does one thing way too much for me. Too many segments with no wrestling.
Yeah, but is it different from what you get from WWE?
It's different.
Because I was doing a little non-scientific study.
Try not to poke my eye out.
Doing a little non-scientific study. Whenever you go, you come back from commercial, and you go to commercial. And in between that time, if you don't ever go to the ring for in-ring action, it's notable. And TNA does it. WWE did it a couple times, too. As long as they don't start doing what was that company again? Based out of Atlanta, owned by Ted Turner. It was a TV company before a wrestling company. WCW. Until they start doing what they did, which was go to break during the match, and WWE did it a couple times too.
WWE does it now consistently, every week, in every show.
What match did they do it this week?
All matches. There's always at least one match on Raw, Superstars, and SmackDown. They do it all the time. Their main event always has a commercial in it. Always.
You're right.
I know I'm right. Meathead right, Damien wrong.
I'll give it to you that time. I thought it was a good Impact last week, but then again, I guess I'm a TNA mark, so.
We're E-marks because we just agreed with Vince at the beginning of this program.
Hell, I lose track of it.
You're a Backstreet Boy mark. I watched the Norman Smiley Vampiro episode again. You are a Backstreet mark.
It was word association.
Yeah, and the first band that you brought up was Backstreet Boys?
Judgment Day, this past Sunday on pay-per-view. Meathead, our review, my review specifically of that pay-per-view has been approved by a lot of the internet wrestling community, but also shot down by many more.
Yeah, it's you've mentioned one time on this very program how when you like something, people hate it. When you hate something, people like it.
I'm the anti-fan.
You're the Antichrist. You're Damien.
Judgment Day had good wrestling. Okay, I'll give you that. But here's the question I ask. At the end of the event, did you get $40 worth? Was it worth buying on pay-per-view? Meaning, was it any different from what you see
keep
on
saying
Raw
the
or
40.
SmackDown?
What about the fans that buy it in high def?
Right. I mean, was it worth the money? I gave it a value of $12.50.
That's not including gratuity.
And I'm not knocking WWE. I'm simply saying, from my standpoint as a wrestling fan, it wasn't worth buying. Going into it, it did nothing to get me to care about the pay-per-view to buy it. Now, great match between Morrison and Shelton Benjamin.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, yes. We had some good wrestling. I'm not faulting the talents. I'm not faulting the stars. They performed. They gave you what they could give you. But
that's
Big
the
Show
problem.
Cena,
That's
how
the
long
problem.
it's been. We've seen him do this epic FU on Big Show so many times. It's old.
That's the problem I have with the John Morrison and Shelton Benjamin match. All they do is I'm going to use Al Snow's line here, the 7 deadly steps of wrestling. That's all they do. And it's just spot to 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 spot. It is mind-numbing. There's no ring psychology. There's no engaging the fan to either care or, despise the person that's working in a ring. It's just, wow, he did a crazy flip. Wow, look at his abs. Wow, look at that. Wow, it's over.
2 minutes are up. Speaking of over, that was 2 Minute Drill. Let's go now to Interactive. We got an email from Brian, who is a viewer and listener of the show, who asks if Jenna Morasca is going to leave TNA because her boyfriend has just been diagnosed with cancer. The answer to that, Brian, from my standpoint, is maybe some time off, but I don't see a reason, depending on the severity of that cancer. Obviously, I don't see any reason for her to.
Right? Is it something that's manageable? I mean, not having dealt with it before, I wouldn't be able to give you an opinion what I would do.
We're going to do this interactive segment each and every week. You can send us emails, which many of you are doing, at pwrshow.com. We respond to every single email we get, so feel free to send those over. Lots of comments about Judgment Day. Lots of comments about a lot of the recent news that's out there.
As far as also interacting, you know what we have now? On Facebook, we have a group that you can become a fan of.
What's
Pro
Facebook?
Wrestling Report. It's on Facebook. Pro Wrestling Report.
So make sure you find it. Speaking of online, make sure you visit MilwaukeeWrestling.com. It's got a great forum there where you can talk about all things Milwaukee Wrestling, including June 12th event from Great Lakes Championship Wrestling. Coming up, featuring Kevin Nash in the main event, not Santino Marella, but Armando Estrada also featured on that card. You can get more information on that at blizzardbrawl.com. And obviously, we are on the radio each and every week.
The radio, kind of like the caller from Monday? I found it on the computer.
On 540 ESPN. You can take that with you on your iPod by just simply searching for Pro Wrestling Report on ESPN Radio on iTunes under the podcast section. Video podcast actually coming soon, so you can take that with you as well. And now, as we've gotten all the plugs and shilling out of the way, let's go now to a interview with Daniels Media. The second time he's been on this program. The first time was surrounding their first live Impact during the WrestleMania 24 week. And we've got some questions for Daniels about TNA, its growth, where its growth has come from, and where it's going to go in the next few years. So without further ado, let's go now to Daniels exclusively here on the Pro Wrestling Report. Damian Nelson here with Christopher Daniels. Oh, I'm sorry, Daniels. Can I say, is it still Christopher?
Call me what you like. Yeah, you can't call me Daniels on the street. I think you're insulting me. So Chris is fine.
Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling has seen a big rise over the last few weeks, whether it be ratings, the big pay-per-view in Philly a couple of weeks ago, all of that stuff. TNA really on a wild ride. You're back, and part of that wild ride What do you attribute it to? What's going on? Fans are finally discovering the alternative TNA.
I think it's just a lot of great talent finally coming together, finding their stride. And Spike TV's been behind us 110%. They've been putting out their best effort. We've been putting out our best effort. And now people are starting to hear about it, starting to realize the word of mouth is starting to come around. So I think TNA is finally hitting that stride, like I said, and people are taking notice, and it's showing in the ratings.
They called Dean Malenko the man of 1,000 moves.
Yes, they did.
I think Daniels is close.
I don't know,
If
man.
not over.
I aspire to be the man that knows 1,000 holds. I tell you what, when I grew up watching wrestling, Dean Malenko was definitely somebody that I idolized, somebody that I tried to emulate. His work ethic, his technical prowess is incredible, and I certainly do aspire to be half as successful as he does.
You've been around in the business of professional wrestling for a while now.
16 years.
And here in TNA, obviously took a little time off, if you will.
Yes.
And now back in the trenches of the battles against the Main Event Mafia and Kurt Angle specifically. A lot of people, we got a lot of feedback on some of the matches you and Angle had coming after you returned to TNA.
Right.
And just the amazing athleticism that we continue to see. Do you ever worry, do you ever wonder if that next big move will be your last?
Well, you know what? I never actually think about that, man. I trust in myself. I trust in my training, and I never let my reach exceed my grasp, if you know what I'm saying. I never put so much on the line that I can't pull it back. But I'm always going out there and I'm giving 110%. But I know that I have to do this night in and night out. This is what I love to do, and I'm never going to do something that's going to risk it. That's going to make it that hopefully would end it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm never going to let it go to that extreme. I love doing this, and I love performing in front of the fans and wrestling, and I'm never going to go out and do something crazy that's going to jeopardize any of that.
16 years in the business, you've seen a lot. A lot of fans out there, a lot of people are talking about the wrestling war that does or doesn't exist, specifically between Total Nonstop Action Wrestling and World Wrestling Entertainment. People are saying TNA should be on against WWE programming. Obviously, that's not the case. But really, is this being overhyped or overanalyzed by the fans? A lot of people compare the ratings of Impact to the ratings of Raw. There really doesn't seem to be a fair comparison there when you look at how many years TNA has been around and how many years the other organization has been around. But this wrestling war, all the fans want to see. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I don't think it's a wrestling war they want to see, because I think that they understand that when two companies are in competition with each other, they push each other to do better work and to do better programming. And so, I think they harken back to the days when WCW and WWE were head-to-head. That was when some of the best television was being put on. And then when WCW closed and WWE was basically in that vacuum, I felt like the fans felt like a lot of that desire, a lot of that drive to be the best thing on television sort of went away. And so I think that they want us to be that head-to-head competitor so that they can see not just better out of WWE, but better out of TNA and better out of pro wrestling as a whole. Now, as far as it being an unfair comparison, sure. I mean, they're in a lot more homes. There's a lot of background. They've got basically a many years head start on us. But the good thing about TNA has always been, in my eyes, that we've never taken such a big step that it would trip us up. We've always taken small steps, but they've always been small steps forward, small steps upward. And every little success we have just builds and builds, and we're building momentum. I mean, we didn't start getting 1.3, 1.4. We didn't start having 2 million viewers. We started a lot lower than that. And there were times where they said we weren't going to last. But every year we keep coming back, and every year Slammiversary's adding another number to the end of that, the name of the pay-per-view. So, I mean, we're making those strides, and we're going to continue to make them.
A lot of people talk about the acquisitions or the big signings, latest obviously being Bobby Lashley coming in and how it hasn't had as big an impact. But I think you touch on a very important point, which could have been the failure of ECW as well, because that did grow too fast. And then the business got behind them. TNA's taking a strategic approach with the growth, and you see these little steps that keep adding to the overall product and growth over a course of time, which is much more important than big bumps.
Well, I also think, too, that the proof that TNA is becoming viable is the fact that we are making these acquisitions. If TNA didn't have a future, if TNA was destined to fail or doomed for failure, people like Bobby Lashley, people like Kurt Angle, people like Mick Foley, they wouldn't look at TNA. You know what I mean? So, I mean, this has become a viable option as far as pro wrestling. This has become a thriving environment when it comes to the art and the business of professional wrestling. And guys like myself and AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, where we found our first taste of the wrestling spotlight here in the six-sided ring. I mean, it's near and dear to our heart, and we want to see it succeed. And we're not going to let anybody like Bobby Lashley or Mick Foley or Kurt Angle, ruin that and sort of be out for themselves. We're all here to make this work for everybody on this whole team, and we're looking to make TNA that viable competitor, that head-to-head competitor for WWE, and make professional wrestling better for everybody.
And certainly you, Daniel's a huge part of that. Glad to see you back in the ring, performing irregularly with TNA. Thank you for joining us, giving us a little bit of your time here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Daniel's Meathead. You put that on top of Abyss. You put that on top of Hernandez.
We still have
who was
another
on
one
us
coming,
a couple
right?
weeks ago. And you know what? Whether they're TNA or WWE, we've got a line out to World Wrestling Entertainment right now for what we hope to be a major interview.
We'll let them have their show here. We just need some interviews.
Exactly. We'll see how that all pans out. But our goal is to bring you stars, no matter where they come from, and give you a little bit of insight into their lives and the wrestling business. But Daniel's saying, of course, he sees big things for TNA in the future. And, a great guy, by the way, Daniels is. I had an opportunity to speak to him at length before and after that interview, and just a great guy. And speaking of great guys, next week, right here on PWR Primetime, Booker T.
Hey!
We shall all hail King Booker next week.
You know what? All I want is a jumpsuit. I want a velvet jumpsuit. You gotta be a made man, brother.
It's time for Beat the Meat.
Not in front of them, I'm not. Don't forget, you can send your answers to Beat the Meat at pwrshow.com. Make sure they're put into comments. You can send us an email, pwrshow.com, and send it to comments at pwrshow.com. Beat the Meat, it's time to beat the meat, giggity. Last week's question you heard on 540 ESPN. What was the name of the band that Jimmy Hart started in before he got into the wrestling business? And the answer was the Gentrys. I guess they had a big hit down in Nashville, kind of a poppy type song, but the Gentrys, that is the answer to Beat the Meat. Don't forget, we got new questions every week on 540 ESPN. When you join us Monday nights at 10 p.m. Central, all the fun and shenanigans, and Frank Cosentino. Comments at pwrshow.com is where you can send your answers. Let's keep on moving.
Beat the Meat.
Yeah, I sure did.
Well, you beat it all right. What a show. Fans, we want to hear your comments on the things we talked about today. So make sure you go ahead and submit those at the forum at pwrshow.com, and also right here on wherever you happen to be watching us across our networks. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, as we said before. Booker T will be our featured guest. If you haven't seen him already, check out our recent interview with Abyss.
Damien
Hernandez
gets
as
choked
well.
out.
I apparently didn't recognize who the hell I was, so I got choked out by Abyss. And, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, all
Well,
these
she would've
names
made you
of
tap
people
out,
who
yeah.
have been on the show.
Wait,
continue to be
did
on
you
the
say a WWE name? Have we had WWE talent on here?
show. Several. This has been the Pro Wrestling Report Primetime for the man they call Meathead and the Cause. This is Damian Nelson saying thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.